Excellent. Awesome. Well, thank you guys again for joining us tonight. Welcome to Zoom, as if you probably haven't been here a few times before. But I'm really excited to be able to share this really neat class and experience in food preservation. Yeah, we are recording the session so that we can share with wider audience. So if you do choose to unmute or turn your camera on, just know that that will be shared. I can allow for time at the end if you did want to unmute and like show us some weird funky mold thing growing that you are really proud of. And we, again, no judgment here. This is just a low stakes kind of introductory class, maybe a little more advanced. You got to be kind of brave to try some things and take some risks, but it's experiments, it's fun, it's science, it's food, and yeah, we'll get started. So my name's Amanda Miller. Caz Ludtke is joining us today as our instructor. I'll try to pin her to the top too, but we are looking forward to sharing with you a lot of great information about food preservation, fermentation, dehydrating, and whatever else you have questions on. We could touch a little bit on canning, and yeah, we really just want this to be a good experience for you all. And just great plug for me. Us. This is brought to you by the South King Tool Library, or sometimes we call ourselves Skittle. I'm actually in our second location here, so we are now open in the Auburn Outlet Collection. Not right now, but the overarching now. We just opened in October, and then we opened in 2020 for service in the Federal Way location that is off of Pack Highway and 340th, and we lend out tools like the library does books, including food preservation tools like some of the ones you see behind me, and lots of other things, lawnmowers, air compressors. Oh gosh, it's a great big list. Welcome you to go to our website at southkingtools.org if you have any questions about our inventory, to make reservations, to probably see this class later too, and some of our other classes. Our YouTube channel also has a lot of our past classes as well, including other classes on food preservation, or even more specifics, there's one just on canning. So it's always good to have a fresh approach to things, and seasonality comes to mind too. So I'm excited to look at some different ways of considering food preservation. So also thank you to our funding support. We also appreciate donations from individuals and organizations, businesses, to help us support our programs, our staff, help incentivize our great and amazing instructors, and bring other classes and programs to you. We do things like swaps and repair cafes and classes, workshops, plus tool checkout, of course. So if you haven't, if this is your first experience with the tool library, then get ready to have your inbox blown up. Kind of, not really, but with lots of really great ways to impact the community and make a difference. So anyway, that's enough of that whole thing. Let's get down to business. Caz has done a really great job, and I'm not going to do too much. I'm going to let Caz introduce herself. And yeah, let's jump into it.
Hi, I'm Caz. I've been a professional chef for about 12, 13 years, and I have a large garden, and so we ferment a lot of our own produce from our garden. So that's what I want to mostly talk about today, is fermented foods. So in this slide here, you can see a bunch of different kinds of fermented foods. There's that big jar of kombucha, you got kimchi, sauerkraut, chocolate and coffee are also fermented as part of their process, which I feel like a lot of people don't know. There's also miso paste, tempeh, and then you can see a bunch of pickled items there as well. And the difference between fermented food and say what you think of as like a classic cucumber pickle that you buy at the grocery store is that they're made with mostly salt and water and the vegetable itself. Whereas your classic pickle you buy from the store in North America, at least, is vinegar based and salt and sugar and flavorings. So it's a bit different of a flavor and a slightly different process. But in the long run, you're preserving the food with salt to make it last longer. So the basics of fermentation. There's a couple different types, and mostly we'll be talking about the lacto fermentation, is yeast and bacteria that converts the sugars in your food, and that creates its own natural preservative. And this is like the most common one that we make at home because it's the easiest, with again salt, water, and your vegetable. The other types you can also make at home, but I won't be super covering them today. But they're all, just a slightly different combination of yeast and salts and sugars and how they break down the food differently. And also then slightly like vinegars and kombuchas are fermented, but they're a little bit of a different beast because you have a SCOBY or a mother, kind of like a fungusy mold piece that you add to your item, as well as your salt or sugar. So it creates a slightly different thing. And then alcohol as well is a fermentation process where you take your, like if you're making cider, for example, you're getting your sugar from apples, or with wine, you're getting your sugar from grapes. So that's broken down in a different category. So mostly we'll be talking about lacto fermentation. And if you look up lactic acid fermentation, you'll also find those are like the same things, but lacto is really the word that you're looking for when you're trying to dive into this world of fermented foods. So when the basic process of making a fermented item is you have your vegetable, you cover it with water, and then you weigh those two items together, and then you figure out how much salt you need. So there's a really great ratio, and a scale really comes in handy, but you can kind of eyeball it, and a little more salt will be okay. So you have 100 grams worth of produce and water, and then you multiply 100 by 0.025, and that equals 2.5 grams of salt. So you're going for about a 2% for like a cucumber, but there are slightly different salt ratios for different products. It kind of just depends on what you're going for. And if you Google it, honestly, you'll find diagrams and instructions everywhere to give you a good idea of what you should go for. A little extra salt is okay, but more than 5% of salt could potentially stop the fermentation. It's going to kill the good bacteria that you're trying to collect. And the bacteria that creates this fermentation process is all on your produce. Even if you just wash it and you're getting it really nice and clean, it still is there. So that is what really, you don't have to add yeast, like if you're making bread or something, or alcohol. So you have your container of stuff all made, all packed with water and salt and mixed together, and then you ferment it. So ideally from 60 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So we often just find, you put it in a closet or something slightly out of the way, a little cooler, a little dark. So if it go during the winter, right now, it might take a little longer to ferment because it's colder, but during the middle of summer when it's warmer, it could go a little faster. So how long do you ferment something? It's all down to your own personal taste. Sometimes 2 weeks is good enough because it's warm. Most of the time, a month. In my experience, for like cucumbers, 2 weeks is a really good place. And that kind of gets you maybe a half sour. So it's not really overpowering in the fermented flavor. But maybe a month or so for something like sauerkraut, because it's just a little heartier and can take more of that sour flavor. So here's a great salt amounts that you need. So cabbage is 2.5, cucumbers is a little more. So this is a good guideline to help you. I've mostly done cabbage and cucumbers and fermented lemons. Other than that, I haven't experimented too much with a whole bunch of other vegetables, because most of the time we just have a lot of cabbages and cucumbers and we spend our focus on making them into different flavors, which is like the fun and exciting part about fermenting. You don't have to just have plain sauerkraut. You can put in a bunch of stuff. Some of our favorite flavors are tarragon or ginger added into your sauerkraut. It makes for a really fantastic condiment side to your plate, really can brighten a whole meal. In my resources at the end of this, there's a link to a website that can show you the conversion for doing something like cups and tablespoon measures in case you don't have a scale. But if you really wanted to get into fermentation, I really highly recommend a kitchen scale. It's useful for a lot of other things too, not just, fermenting. It's good for other times in the kitchen, like baking. Yeah, making a mix of different cabbages or other vegetables put into your sauerkraut is also really great. So how do you keep the water, the liquid, above the surface of your fermented food? There's a bunch of different examples here, like a little plastic lid, little glass weights work really well. And so I have those, but you can just fill a bag with water and press that on top to ensure that the water stays above your produce, because that's where you're going to keep everything nice and clean. You could also do a little jar that fits inside, anything to keep the water above the surface. And that's a really big point when it comes to fermenting. You need an anaerobic environment, so everything needs to be submerged. That's one of the things when you're looking at it and seeing if it's still good, if things are fermenting nicely, to make sure that water is above the level of your produce. And here on the side of the slide, that big brown crock, that's a German crock. So it has those two white semicircles that you would press down on the top of your produce, and then the water will come above it. And then you put the lid on, and the lid goes inside the lip of the jar. And so you pour water into that, and that creates its own water seal. And the tool library just got one of those, so that'll be really exciting for somebody to borrow. But on the next slide, then it's other types of airlocks. So you're trying to keep the gas that the fermented food creates. You want to allow it to escape, but you don't want to allow anything else in. So there's a bunch of different types that you can buy for adding on to mason jars, and that's like the easiest thing to ferment in. A big glass jar that you can make sure is really nice and clean. And the airlock, a lot of them will have a space to add a little bit of water, so that then the gas can be released, but no other air can be brought into it. And you'll see a lot of those like S-shaped ones. Also, people use them for fermenting alcohol, and there's a little like rubber cork seal that you fit into the tops of bottles. But again, if you don't have any of these, that's fine. You just have to remember to burp your jar. So whatever kind of lid you've got, if it's a solid lid that you can't, air doesn't go in and out, you just, every day you come by and like unscrew it and screw it back on. But anytime you're touching any of your fermented things, everything needs to be really, really clean. That's like step number one after you've gathered your ingredients. Like, wash those jars, wash your hands. If you are checking on your ferment at some point as well, wash your hands, wash your tools, use clean, rubber throwaway gloves, or, use an implement, use a pair of tongs or a fork or something to get something out. Because anytime you're going to, introduce something in, you could have some cross-contamination where you're introducing a different bacteria into your ferment. And that can, there goes all your produce and your hard work and all that time you've waited to make something really tasty. And so the other thing about keeping everything clean is a lot of fermented foods will grow mold, and like what kind of mold is good, what kind of mold is bad. So number one, keep all of your things clean. You got to keep liquid above your produce. Everything is fully submerged. Get rid of all the air pockets when you pack things in. And
Sorry.
no worries. And check the water seal once in a while. Like we have the German crocks at home, and if we don't put our crock in the closet, the cats will come by and lick up some of that water. So, or it evaporates, so you got to refill it once in a while. We've found that when we do cucumbering, when we ferment them for pickles, sometimes a white film can appear on the surface. As long as it's not fuzzy or thick, it's a type of yeast. So you could scoop it off, but it's totally okay to be there. But if it's anything other than that, like mold has legs. Even if you scoop it out and it looks fine, things taste fine, technically there's still mold in there. That's why when people also say like, oh, just cut off the mold off your tomato and it'll still be fine. Like if mold grows in wet things, it has a greater chance of growing legs deeper into that food item versus something dry, like a piece of bread. You could throw away those couple pieces of bread on the end that are moldy, and the rest of the loaf is fine. So keep that in mind. Everything needs to be clean. And if you're going to transfer your thing into another jar when you're all done fermenting it, because it's too big of a jar to fit in your fridge, it's got to be a clean jar. Everything needs to be clean. It's that same way when you do a canning project. You want everything to be nice and clean. We're trying to keep the bad stuff out and the good stuff in. And then when you're all done with your fermented food item, like this is pickled enough for me, it's got enough soury tang, what do you do with it? You can stick it in the fridge if you have room, which a lot of the times we don't end up having room. And so you can hot can, like a water bath can, a lot of your stuff. Just know that with some of the things, it loses a little bit of that great fresh brightness of a fermented food. But it's okay. It's a great way to keep them shelf stable unless you have a whole extra fridge. You can keep all of these giant crocks of pickles and things in. So for us during the summer, our fridge is solidly filled with pickles because we like them fresh like that, and we can some of them though. So things to ferment though, there's a little list here of some fun things more for like a little seasonal holiday something. So if you have a kombucha SCOBY, you could always make a pumpkin or a cranberry orange one. There's a really great cranberry, like fermented cranberries in honey. So you just fill up a mason jar with cranberries, and you could throw in a few like whole spices would be really nice, and cover it with honey. And it only just takes a couple days for that to ferment. And that's a really lovely like kind of condiment to make a slightly different cranberry accompaniment for your Thanksgiving meal. Christmas sauerkraut is a fun flavor as well. Apples, some spices, maybe some raisins, that kind of thing. It just changes it a lot from what everyone thinks of sauerkraut when you have it on like, you know, a sausage or something. And then another great one would be a ginger and turmeric carrot. That could be really lovely for like a cheese pickle plate kind of a thing for the holidays. And the horseradish mustard in particular, I really like that one for Christmas on like roast beef. There's so many ideas out there, and it's all just down to experimenting. And if you make something and you're kind of like, I don't know what to do with this, then give it away for a holiday gift.
I love that. I like to give away like a quick pickles. I make refrigerator pickles and I've done that a couple of times. I don't know if I'll have time to do
because
that this
sometimes
year,
you want
but
to you want to experiment and try a new flavor, but it's like, how in the world am I going to be able to eat a whole quart of whatever this, you know, specialty item is?
yeah, and you never know, you know, it's experiments. I'm trying to put all the links into the chat, so if anybody wanted to have them, I'll try to make this a compendium, or we'll consolidate all of these and send these to everybody, because there's so many great recipes out there, but it's nice if you can kind of have them filtered, because you can get overwhelmed really easily.
Yeah,
I was gonna ask you, have you ever made a ginger bug?
I haven't, but I've always wanted to. There's always so many things to make, it never enough time. But once you get started, then you kind of either you get used to the waiting or you have something that's ready, and then you can, just every month
Cycle
make
through.
a different fermented thing.
Yeah, it's really similar to that cranberry dish. That's why, or the cranberry drink that you were describing. So I love cranberries.
There's other things like black garlic or tapache, which is the
Yes.
Mexican pineapple fermented
Pineapple.
drink that
Yeah.
I always want to make all of these things, but I know I just want one glass. So that's why it's great to make and then share with others.
Definitely. Awesome. All right. Is this where we kind of pivot? I'd love for you to talk more about the so I was going to do the section here on dehydrating and drying, but Caz is way ahead of me and actually in her pantry right now and has some really great examples of things that she has dehydrated and look delicious and sound delicious. Do you want to show everybody what you were showing me?
Yeah, I've got a few
before?
things in here. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and I can share, I have something. So at the Tool Library, we had our grand opening here in Auburn in October, and we had our cider press. And so we peeled, I don't know, Adelia, how many pounds of apples did we we go through? So we kept all the peels. One of our board members actually made applesauce and then apple jam out of the leftovers that had been pressed, and then I just threw all the cores into this this orange juice jar that I had cleaned. Oh, it didn't burp as much as I thought it would be, but I was just trying to kind of experiment without any sugar, without anything. This guy did kind of bloat up and get a little fermented, but I think I can potentially use this to make a vinegar eventually, but I thought that was really entertaining.
So here are some dried apple chips. They're really nice for a snack, but if you cut them too thick and you find that you can't get them so dry and crispy, then they really work fantastic for a apple pie. You just rehydrate them and then you get a pie that has a little more chew and texture to it, but then it isn't soggy. And then here's a bunch of dehydrated citrus. And so it works beautiful for Christmas decorations, but we also really love it for garnishing a cocktail. It just looks really fancy. And then this is a dehydrated dill pickle powder. And this amount was like half a gallon or something like that, like crazy amount that got dried to that small. And then this is a kimchi powder as well. So popcorn seasoning or, whatever. The possibilities are endless, but we did this very recently and I'm really excited to play with it.
It's awesome. No, I like the citrus slices too. I do like simmer pots, especially when I'm cooking. Thanksgiving is great, fills the house with wonderful smells, but like sometimes I just want to not smell like the savory. I just prefer like cinnamon sticks and stuff to make it fresh afterwards. So I definitely throw whatever into a simmer pot. And that's a great way, to use an excess amount of citrus too. Drying them.
If I peel oranges or something, I'll just save them in the freezer to make what we call then smelly water. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a couple other things too. I was excited to be able to use some of the things that I have learned over the years or tried. I'm not by any means nearly as qualified as Caz is to talk about things, but I have lots of what I would say learned experience, lots of screw ups, lots of oopsies, things, but I wanted to share about some things about dehydrating and drying that you may not have known, hopefully, or if it's not new to you, then we can come up with something else too. But definitely, lots of different ways to dry things. We were talking about, we've used ovens, and there's actually in the center there is similar to that. We have a big dehydrator in our inventory in Federal Way that has these nice trays, and it's rear heated, so you don't have to rotate the trays. The one on the right bottom is your more traditional dehydrator like this one here, so you do have to rotate the trays, but there's even an insert into that for things like the
Fruit leather.
fruit roll-ups. Yes, there we go. Yeah, the fruit leather and anything else that might fall through the grate that you see there. So I did also just want to do a shout out to myself for keeping up herbs pretty much year round, because I have forgotten about them, and my husband thinks that I'm like channeling some kind of inner cottage witch kind of thing. But we always have a lot of herbs at the tool library's rain garden, and I'll bring them home and hang them up on our deck on the umbrella or wherever. And I'm sure if anyone came over and was like, what's happening? It would be a weird time, but my friends know me pretty well. So, and then on the top right is a sun drying dehydrator, which, the things that we're talking about have been around for hundreds of thousands of years. And I think it's amazing that we have like this technology that we can really overthink it, or you can really simplify it. So, of course, that's not taking into account things like, birds and other things that have happened and we have to compensate for, or tiny hands maybe reaching in and grabbing things. But yeah, there's lots of different ways to dry and dehydrate. Your oven is also an option, right? You can get really low settings on a lot of the modern ovens, maybe not as low as some of the older models or like gas ovens, but it's exciting to experiment with. So yeah, that was kind of what I have for dehydrating. There's a lot of recipes available. There's a lot of specific things. You want to cut things really thin. You want to make sure you're cleaning things thoroughly before you dry it, because you don't want to grind up your bugs with the herbs once they're dry. I mean, I guess it's protein, and I won't get into statistics about like how many parts per million bugs are allowed in manufactured food, but just email me if you need details on that. But yeah, it's sort of a big, broad approach to dehydrating. There's lots of ways to remove water, and I think water is kind of the key with all of these things. So fermentation is a way of using water to preserve, and then dehydrating is, of course, taking all of the water away. And then in other forms of preservation, there are, the salts and sugars that are used to remove and displace and leave a lot of different flavor. That's why when you have a pickle or have, a preserved like citrus peel, it tastes entirely different than if you ate just the raw citrus peel. It doesn't taste like that at all. So lots of really innovative ways to utilize these things. So like cleaning, I love using orange peels. Mostly lemon peels get a little too, like, there's too much in them. If you use just a few with the orange peels, that's nice too. But I use that in vinegar to create like a better smelling cleaning product, if you will. I just literally put it into a spray bottle and put the cleaning vinegar on top of it, and I can use the peel in that way. Even for that, I don't even really bother to clean off the pith, the white part, as much, but that is, of course, suggested if you're going to do something like preserved citrus peels, which are really delicious. And one of my grandma's favorite was to dip those into chocolates. And, that's lots of really great recipes out there that can show you how to do that. The scrap vinegar, like I was telling you guys about, that you can use, processing all your apples, if you're making applesauce or you're making dried apple chips and you want to use as much as you can of the apple, you can definitely put it to the side and figure it out later. But covering it with water, or allowing it to be it's not oleosaccharide, is it? It's, using sugar to preserve it. You can do a lot of really great infusions into sugars and into syrups with those flavors. So candied is another good one. So actually the candied fruit peels are what you would dip into chocolate. The preserved citrus peels are more of the for cocktails and stuff. So that's a little different, but Yeah, I'll put some of these into the chat or send this like really long list of URL links that we have here out later. Yeah, because kind of going back to dehydrating, there's a lot of options to use some of the peels and scraps that we're using. You know, Thanksgiving is a huge time for food waste, not just the food that you're making, but all the food that it takes to make those things, right? So I've put into the put in the link here a video. One of my favorite things is this is a TikTok video. This is a guy, his name is Spicy Mustache. I might have a little crush on him, to be quite honest. He's I think he's a French guy, but he tries to do zero waste gardening and zero waste food prep and preservation. So it's really amazing, the kind of range. But you know, I was skeptical when it came to drying onion and garlic peels because of the flakiness that they tend to have. But I was sharing with Caz that I have a really fine powder that I've made out of just roasting all of the scraps and peels together. I did incorporate things like some peels of carrot and stuff too, but grinding those up and then using a mortar and pestle to make it finer and add that. You know, you could put that on top of a bagel. You can, you know, add that to soup. There's also like just a flakiness that you can add, which is better in like soups, but it tastes like if you know, bouillon is one thing where you have salt and you have that umami, really heavy flavor, but these, you know, not even using any salt or any oil even, the garlic and onion peels lend themselves to a really aromatic, like roasted vegetable flavor, which is nice. And then for the other sort of scraps, like the tops and the bottoms of celery, because you know you got to chop that up and use that in your turkey stuffing, and some of the other scraps you're going to end up with at Thanksgiving. Making a broth is always really easy when you cover them with water and let it go. You want to simmer so you don't burn a lot of the things, but you can concentrate it down so you can store it a little easier. You want to avoid like the cabbages, but things like sweet scraps like bell peppers, probably, like if you have some of those, you can add that, or like corn cobs, the actual cob on the inside, throw those in too.
Or if you have those tiny little bits of garlic, like the center few cloves that are too tiny, you don't want to peel them, those always go in my freezer scrap bag for stock.
Yeah. Oh, and that's perfect. Yeah, throw them in the freezer until you have enough to make your broth and stuff. And I especially do that with like shrimp shells and seafood and meat and stuff. I'll just throw it into the freezer because I don't want to deal with it right then until I have enough. And I'm like, all right, now we can move you to the processing center. And then there's also things like infusions, and that's kind of a catch-all sort of term, I feel like. So, you know, dehydrating things like that you might have extra in your garden. We always have a lot of daisies at the tool library, and daisies are edible. You could dehydrate the petals and grind them into, you know, some kind of little powder, so you can add an infusion or add them directly into an oil to infuse that flavor. Violets are really good as well. I'm trying to think of some of the other like sweet things you can do. Dandelions too. Lots of edible flowers.
Dandelion roots as well. That's what's used in a lot of bitters, or you can grind it up and make a type of coffee beverage.
Yeah, it's a tea. Let's not just we're Pacific Northwesterners. We can't do coffee like that to say that that's a coffee. But yes, there's lots of teas and lots of herbal blends you can make that are really excited. One of my favorites is just like olive oil that I have, you know, by my stove if I want to. I have all my like the stems of my rosemary and stuff, or like extra sprigs, and I'll just put it into the little jar, and it just infuses. It
Yeah.
allows that to come out. It's
And you can
wonderful.
do the same thing with vinegar as well. So making an
Mhm.
infused vinegar with your little herb scrappies is fantastic. Or
Yeah.
chive blossoms, if you happen to have chives in your garden, that's a really great
Yes.
vinegar.
I love chive blossoms. Also, you can dehydrate and grind, and that's like an onion powder with like a little less of a very strong. So there's some people, um my mom's boyfriend doesn't eat onion, can't eat onion, and so I'm, she's constantly sharing different recipes that they've used, and I was like, I wonder if this would work, and I think, I haven't tried it to taste it, but I've heard it's pretty good. So there's lots of things like that. Yeah, and your weeds, right? Like there's so many native species of medicinal herbs and plants. There's a great one of our videos on our YouTube channel is called Edible Spring Greens, and it's led by a native herbalist. That is Melissa Myers, and she talks, I think bear with me here, I think it's an hour-long class, but I think she only talks about 3 different plants, and that's because there's so much to learn about those 3 plants. Like I've seen cleaver tea, that is $10.99 a pound or whatever, at the grocery store. That's one thing that we didn't really talk about either, is like how much money you can really save by doing some of these things yourself. So, we want to make sure you're doing it safely. You want to make sure you don't have like misidentification for a lot of plants if you're foraging on your own. But I would, unless you are very intelligent, stay away from the mushroom family, because that's a whole problem area. But I learned at that class that cleavers are really good for your lymphatic system, and my husband has a condition that affects his lymphatic system, so I made him try some fresh cleaver tea. He hated it tasted like grass, but he tried it, and that that's something. So also wanted to mention bitters and extracts, and as Kaz mentioned, giving people your wares or the things that you're trying to do, or just being frugal about like, gift giving, or not wanting to create waste this time of year is a great way to, give someone that you've want to give them a gift, but maybe give them something that is that they'll be able to use or save money on. I've been doing my own vanilla extract, so taking vanilla beans and infusing them in vodka actually. So it creates a pretty high concentrated vanilla extract, just like I put it into my pancakes and everybody likes it. So you can do that a lot with other elements as well. There's bitters are really fun. You can make alcohol free or non-alcoholic bitters, which still use alcohol, but a lot of the alcohol is evaporated out of them. And even, again, bitters can have a big range of flavor. If you really don't like that anise flavor, making your own bitters where you can use like orange peels or just a little slight cinnamon or cardamom instead of star anise, or some of the other like deeper herbs, that's always an option. So yeah, have fun with that. What did I miss in the chat there? Tarragon vinegar? That sounds delicious. I love tarragon. But again, that's that like licorice kind of flavor. Not everybody's bag. So, maybe you want oregano vinegar or something. Certain things won't be picked up as easily in certain infusions too, depending on the kind of oils you use to infuse with. You're going to have those elements. You want to choose like a really neutral oil to cook with, or that you want to, putting it into coconut oil isn't maybe going to do the same thing as it's going to do when you're infusing it into olive oil, and almond oil being the same thing. But some of those less really distinct flavors allow that infusions to be absorbed more Yes. So I prefer to stay in the realm of not meat when it comes to experimenting with a lot of the dehydrating and scraps, but you easily are gonna have a whole bunch of bones next week when you finish up your Thanksgiving dinner. So I thought it would be really relevant to talk about how to make broths, and using bones and jerkies is another, element of dehydrating that you're gonna, you know, what did I say earlier? It's it's all about the marinade, and it's all about cutting cutting your meat against the grain. It helps to tenderize. It's all about tenderization. And then it does, I feel like you have to have a specific dehydrator for jerky, because if you try to do fruit leather and you try to do jerky in the same dehydrator, you might end up with funky tasting fruit jerky. So there's also bone things that you can use bones for besides eating them. Pets should not eat most bones just the way that they are. But if you roast those bones and put them into a food processor, they're going to become very dry and brittle, and they'll powder up really nicely, and you can add that to your dog's food. It's a really easy source of calcium and protein. You can use that for your it's a plant. Oh, did I add the guy? Yeah, so this YouTube YouTube link here is actually another social media guy. I can't think of his name, is like Creative something, but he's the guy that's like always in your face, and all you need is just this stuff. He takes chicken bones, blends them, adds a teaspoon to water, and then feeds plants. So plants need a lot of the same things that you and I need, magnesium, all of the different things that you would find in those vitamins are going to be great for your plants. And I think that that's always fun to, again, save money if you're trying to keep your houseplants alive and you're not sure what they need. Also, there's a lot of recipes for broths. Like I said, I throw stuff into the freezer until I have enough, maybe, or I just don't have any more room in my freezer. And I take it out and I work with it. You can use combinations of different things too, using your vegetables or scraps and your bones, or your shells, like in shrimp's case. You have a lot of the dynamic that you're going to get the flavor is going to come from what is going to be the most concentrated in your pot. So if you have like one onion and you have like all of the turkey bones, it's not going to really have a ton of flavor, but it might change it just a little bit. It's a really fun way to, again, experiment like with flavors, and just kind of feel like you're using every little thing that's left. So I have some other resources here. So I don't know what that YouTube link is. We'll have to see. It might be our YouTube. Yeah, I think that's what it is the South King Tool Library's YouTube channel, because we have some of our past classes up there, again, on like canning, pressure canning, water bath canning, and the dynamics there. We didn't talk much about those today because we wanted to talk a lot about some things that you can do this time of year. And obviously there's a lot of resources, but it's kind of dependent on the recipe that you're going to use for canning. So always follow a recipe when it comes to canning, because there are a lot of room for errors, I think maybe is a nice way of putting it. And then, the King County Food Waste Prevention Guide is great for resources on how you can utilize all of your food waste. And the other great tip from here is the university extensions, University of Oregon, Western State, all of Georgia is a great one for food preservation, but the bottom line, they're really good because they have people actually doing a lot of the experiments and able to take the time and do a lot of really good analysis on those, so they can have really precise guidelines on the proper ways to process. And yeah, these are some of Caz's great sources.
So here, the top link is for salt measurements in teaspoons, in case you don't have a scale on hand. That'll give you a good ballpark of where to start. Then the next one is for a salt calculator if you do have a scale, but you just, you don't remember it. I'm always having to look it up as well, so it's really nice to just have a place to input it, and it does the math for me. The next one is for a book, The NOMA Guide to Fermentation. If you really love fermented foods and you're serious about it, this book is fantastic. And it also has the more odd things, like there's a coffee kombucha recipe in there that was really surprisingly great. They cover a lot of more things like soy sauce or miso paste that for me I'm more unfamiliar with, so that's a really great guideline. And then the last one is for Beryl. She's a YouTube person. A lot of people might know about her. She covers a lot of like international food things where she asks her viewers to send me in your funny recipes, or you like toast, what do you put on toast? So this one is specifically about using up scraps, and like the first one was spectacular. My mind was blown. It's about Parmesan rinds, and a lot of people I think you can put them in like your spaghetti or sauce or something, and it'll help
in
flavor
stocks too.
Yeah, and stocks too. But she like braises them and then grinds them up and adds some like flour and egg and turns them into meatballs, but they're like Parmesan rind balls. They look amazing.
Low fat. Yeah, that's
yeah.
delicious.
Yeah. And then I wanted to make another point about dehydrating as well. When you're removing your stuff from the dehydrator, it's a real, again, clean hands, everything with clean hands, so you have less things around. And then if you super get in dehydrating and you're dehydrating a lot of stuff, getting the little like sachets of little moisture absorbies to put them in your jar or your bag with your dehydrated food will ensure that they keep their crisp a little longer. And then one other fun thing to dehydrate, it's kind of like in the middle, it's salted egg yolks. So if you have leftover egg yolks from, I don't know, making a bunch of meringues or something, and you don't want to make a bunch of hollandaise sauce, then you can salt your egg yolks. Like you make a pan of salt, plop your egg yolks in and cover them with more salt, and they sit in there for about a week. But so then they're cured and you can grate them over like salad and stuff. It's really a fun little activity flavor thing, something a little different. Wow. But sometimes they end up being a little sticky. So I always pop mine in the dehydrator to get them like really dry so that they last longer as well. Even though they're covered in salt, they still are kind of gooey.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point too. I totally forgot about one of the other things that we have in inventory is a vacuum sealer, and that is wonderful for, drying those dehydrated items. Yeah, those desiccant things, make sure they're food grade, not the ones that come in your shoes. And then, yeah, sealing them in the airtight vacuum sealer, just allows for them to be shelf stable for even longer. You can vacuum seal wet things too, like your meat, so that it's preserved longer, and you can do things like cure in that vacuum faster. So having like the a meat or something that you want to process into jerky, or maybe you don't know what you're going to do with it, and hunting season, I don't know, my dad always came home with like, when you get a deer, you get the whole deer, so you have to figure out what you're doing with all of the whole deer, which I won't divulge to everyone all of the things that you have to do to process a deer, but I do know them. But if you want to salt cure those, or do you can sugar cure. A lot of people when they're preserving like fruit, you just toss them in sugar before you throw them into the freezer. That way they won't stick together. You can toss them with sugar to just make them taste good, and vacuum seal it, and it'll be a little snack later. Or you dehydrate them and toss them with little sugar so that they're sweet snack for tiny people, because there's lots of things that they need to eat, right? So
people also ferment in like a vacuum sealed bag, it's definitely meant for like a shorter fermentation, just a couple days. And then since you've sucked all the air out of it, but it's fermenting and creating gas, they turn into giant balloons. And then, it's kind of done.
That's fun. So I didn't know if we got a lot of the links into the chat. Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. Adelia just punctuated this with a loaded question if I ever heard one, but what to do with pig's foot? And yeah, Caz, you want to take a crack at that?
So Adelia, I think those are the ones that you got from me. I thought you were
Yeah, there's a story behind them. So we were talking about meats, and I ended up going the dehydration route and put it in the engine room of my boat for a couple weeks until the engineer thought I was pretty much trying to do some sort of voodoo magic spell on him. And so now it's in a bag, and I should vacuum seal it before I figure it out. So it just made me think about it again.
I think at this point, though, I'm not really sure. A dehydrated pig's foot, maybe they would just make some good creepy witchy Halloween decorations.
Yeah, that's probably what it'll end up being. It's gonna go back to Jesse somehow, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I did grow up also, my grandparents, we would cook whole pigs, and so smoking, is another way of fermenting and another way of curing meat. And so my grandpa would always smoke pigs over the summer. He had like these big barrel cookers. I remember like he would pull 3 of them behind his truck. I feel like that wasn't really probably safe on the highway, but I was younger. But there are pickled pig's feet recipes. There are lots of really good connective tissue and things that are in those pig feet. A lot of cultures do eat those. I think it's really interesting what as Americans, what we eat and what we don't eat. But yeah, there's a market for that, I'm sure. Yeah, well, thank you, Caz. There's like so much more we can probably, ramblingly talk on. I also wanted to make sure everybody that's in the class gets some pickling spices. I was gonna make a blend, and then I went to Marlene's and they had a really good blend, and they have a whole section just for fermentation. You can get your own crock. You can get everything you need, which this is the other thing that is very helpful with crock and fermenting things in the crock, which also still needs to be clean. Oh, that's what I was going to ask Caz is, and mention that vinegar, so alcohol, vinegar, and boiling water are ways to sterilize different things, but you have to be careful because things like vinegar actually, doesn't that stop fermentation if you use that? Is that right?
You can, and I'd say for the most part at home, hot soapy water really does the trick. Those weights that you have for the German crock that are like porous ceramic, those I would say when you clean them, they need to end up being incredibly dry before you store them away. We've on occasion maybe not let them dry thoroughly, and you pack up your crock and you're done using it for the season, and they might end up getting a little moldy. So those like just leave them out for like a whole week to ensure that they're super dry before you pack them away.
I feel like you can boil these too.
Yeah,
you
probably
pretty much. Yeah. And then, so for more porous things too, what do you think? This is obviously wood. It's pretty much sealed. It actually looks like the ends are
honestly
rough.
Warm, hot, soapy water for the most part is all we do, and we feel really good about that. When you get into making alcohol, that I feel like is you're going to make it in a larger quantity most likely, and then just like a half gallon or something jar or whatever. So a lot of people do like an iodine based like sanitizing wash.
Gotcha. Yeah. Oh, Catherine wants to know what the stick is for.
It's for pushing down your produce item to ensure that it stays underneath the water, and it goes in between the center hole there, so you can make sure to poke things down in that one spot.
Yes. So when you're fermenting, if you haven't done any fermentation before, you get lots of bubbles and expansion and things that like Kaz was talking about, you want it to be anaerobic. So, right, is that right? Is that the right word? Okay. I want to make sure it was safe. But, you know, so you want to remove those bubbles that are down underneath it. I've done a lot of or not a lot. I've done it a few times with the lactobacillic sauerkraut on the counter in a glass container, and you can see when the bubble starts to form that you'd need to push it down. And yeah, that's always helpful. But yeah, well, thank you guys for listening. I was gonna go ahead and...
Adelia has one more question about best vegetables for fermentation. Honestly, you can ferment anything you want, but it comes down to what are you actually going to eat and what do you like? Because, you know, you kind of get some crazy idea in your head and you're like, yeah, I'm going to ferment this because I have a bunch of beets left over, but you don't really like beets very much. It kind of ends up being a waste. And I do think that like firmer things are easier and better to ferment. Like you can, you know, like if you think about an apple sitting in water for a month, you know, I feel like you might just end up with like a squishy, mealy thing. But if it's, you know, you got a few slices in your big thing of, you know, cabbage to make sauerkraut, then it's just going to be, you know, a softer thing that kind of blends in with the rest of your vegetables. But if it was all apple, it might not be the right texture. Like if you just think about what is a popular food to ferment, or, you know, when you look them up, you find a lot of cabbage and a lot of certain vegetables because they're really good and other ones aren't as great, but you could ferment them. You could try.
What is, I've made like a pickled, so I do two things when I clean out my refrigerator. Either I pickle things or I make soup. And so if it's, you know, there's leftover, is it called Garderia or something? It's like the French
Giardiniera.
There you go, that one. Which, you know, I really like pickled green beans and Bloody Marys and things like that. You can blanch those, you know, you put them into hot water and then you put them into cold water so that they're partially cooked, and then you can add a pickling mix or pickling spice right on top of that. Sometimes I'll just do, you know, whatever, like I said, whatever I have in there. So I'll put peppers and carrots and cauliflower and other things. But yeah, well, thank you guys for joining us. But yeah, I'm, you know, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just like, this tastes good to me, and I know that, and I can eat it. I just throw it into the fridge. I don't usually do too much else.
The first time you try anything new, I always say follow a recipe. And then after you've done it a few times and you really got the handle of it, then, you know, experiment, try all of your leftovers and see what you can make out of it. And fermentation sometimes can be disappointing. Something gets moldy and there goes like the 2 or 3 weeks that you waited and you're hoping it was going to be good. So just try, you know, one new thing a month or something, you know, if you really like it, and that way you always have something going or something to look forward to.
I'm going to pause the recording.